All right, we are recording, and here we go. Good day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Martinis. I'm Andy Everett.
I'm Jim Goodman.
Welcome aboard as we do our first virtual edition of the Sports Martinis in what is now the era of social distancing. And instead of being cooped up in a 12 by 12 studio, we're doing this via Zoom for the first time. Quite interesting.
Am I far enough away from you for social distancing?
I hope so. Actually, I'm done with social distancing. This is what I'm considering day 11, and I'm guessing we've got about 30 more days of this. And I'm not sure what's going to kill me first, the anxiety and the boredom, or if I'm going to get corona somewhere along the way. I don't want to make light of what is a terrible and dreadful pandemic, but I don't think us as humans were meant to social distance.
No, I totally agree. And, I would hope that it would be anxiety and boredom, because I know you'll have a very, very long life if that's the case. But, if you want humor in times like this, it's out there. I ran across a stand-up routine that Norm Macdonald did I think at the Improv, which is on YouTube or anywhere else. You can just search Norm Macdonald, and it's a little dark, but he found a way to bring a little humor into the situation.
Well, the sports world has certainly been impacted by it the most, and that's one of the things that we discuss quite often in this. And I don't say it's impacted the most. I think it's been impacted the most for sports fans. And here's what I mean by that. I think that sports, for those of us who are fans, is an escape from the reality of life. We get in the car in the morning on the way to a job that some of us may love or not love, and we listen to a sports talk show about what happened last night. We go to lunch and we listen to another sports talk show about what may happen coming up. And then we get in the car in the evening and we listen to another sports talk show, and then we go home and watch sports on TV. And our weekends are full of sports. And sports has always been the toy box of life, and it is the way that we figure out a way to escape from the things that suck in life. When you're at a basketball game for 3 hours, or you go to a golf tournament, or you watch it on television, most of the time you're not thinking about the things that make life not as good as it would be if that wasn't there. And without that void, or with that void now in our lives, there's no escape from what is one of the worst realities most of us have ever lived through.
And it's incredibly difficult for everyone to kind of wrap your mind around what's going on in the sports world. But it's really nothing more than just a reflection of what's going on just in society globally right now. To begin with, everything is shut down. The really sad parts of all of this are you have a lot of people that work in these stadiums and arenas that are seasonal employees, and they only get paid if there's games. And I know some of the players and various leagues and teams are working together to put together some kind of fund to go ahead and pay them, and that's terrific. But the end point, I just saw the unemployment numbers for the United States. It's staggering, and so that carries over into the sports world. I was like, well, it's I almost hate to say this, Andy, but right now I really miss the XFL.
Yeah.
So I did a search and ended up watching 45 minutes of curling. That was in either in German or in Swiss language or French. I'm not really sure. But I watched 45 minutes of curling. That was the only sports that I could find. Now they're starting to show the classic games from even as far back as the 90s, and I'm assuming they'll dig deep into their vault and show some of the games. I wouldn't mind watching some of that, because there's some really good games that in our memories, we remember those games, but to actually have time to sit and watch some of those again, I think it'll be almost as enjoyable. But having the games gone and having people being impacted, from in the National Hockey League, that's a league that mostly survives off of sponsors not paying them nearly as much as the delegates. Well, the Montreal Canadiens just furloughed 60% of their entire workforce. So there are people out there being hurt.
Yeah, I look at all these sports leagues that are still operational. Baseball, we're recording this show on the 26th day of March, and I listened to to Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, talking about potential things that could happen and things that he hoped happen, and then the doomsday effect that we could have a 0 games played in the baseball season. And I think that one of the things that's going to be interesting to find out is when this is over, what is the time frame? And even though politicians have certain dates that they have in mind, doctors have other dates. And it's not like Major League Baseball, for example, is played in 1 or 2 cities. I mean, Kansas City, for example, may be coronavirus free, but New York City is going to take a long time to recover from this. So you can't play you may not be able to play games in Citi Field and Yankee Stadium at a much later date that you can play in Kansas City or St. Louis. And then you're starting that social non-interaction that we are certainly accustomed to, where everything is global. People travel for their jobs from one city to the next. People who are in New York go to California and back on a regular basis sometimes. And so you're reintegrating society to a certain extent and potentially causing a flare-up of this again. So I'm hopeful that the steps that are being taken now will allow for the recovery to happen sooner than later and give doctors and the virologists time to figure out how to combat this so that when it does, or if it does spike again, that we're not going through this again and shutting down our world.
Right. And I'm sure there are some people out there, especially people that are not sports fans, but let's just look at sports the way you do any other entertainment. Whenever society is challenged in some way, whether it be during a time of war or like now with this pandemic, you're always looking for a way to escape. And without sports world being able to play that escape that you're looking for, you can't even go to movies now. The only way you watch a movie is Netflix, Hulu, or something that's on television. But the social interaction of going out, going to a movie theater, going to a stadium, going to an arena, and watching that with thousands of people around you, concerts. I mean, there's something to that I think as humans that we all kind of crave a little bit. And it'll be good when everything kind of calms down, but it'll be interesting to watch how it's rolled back out again. Because I personally think if you can just open the doors and just snap your fingers and say, hey, everything's back to what it was. I think there are some things that are going to have to be put in place. There might even have to be a situation to where, okay, we're only going to allow X amount of people in the facility, and they have to sit 4 feet from each other. Well, I mean, that might be great to watch a live entertainment vehicle like sports, but the interaction you have with that game and fans, is that going to be forever changed, or do we finally get back to what we thought was normal?
I think there'll be some normal, what we define normal as now, at some point. I'm looking at the NFL, and the NFL is still operational, except their facilities have been closed, so the players can't go there to train. Athletes, and I'm kind of curious as to how athletes are coping with this. The Olympics have been stopped, and I don't think the Olympics have been stopped because we won't be out of the woods by July 24th when they were supposed to start. But athletes have to train between now and July 24th in order to be able to perform at an Olympic level. And there's trials that have to be done, and there's tryouts, and there's competitions leading up to that in order to qualify for the Olympics. So there's no way to actively qualify people and then as you said, restart everybody at the same exact time and say, let's resume life, and with the snap of the finger, you've got an athlete that in some way has probably had to scale back their training and their work. Now, I would think that the uber rich athletes, the Tom Brady's and LeBron Jameses and things like that, they probably have gyms in their own house. They probably have treadmills and ellipticals and the weight machines and all that, and the trainers that they work out would work with come to them anyway. But most of the Olympic athletes train at an Olympic facility somewhere around the United States. And with all of those facilities now shut down because you don't want multiple people coming in, and obviously a gym is a petri dish for germs to begin with, not in a non-corona era. Now there's got to be a time where you can reintroduce that to people. I mean, every gym in the United States, I think, and probably around the globe, is not going to open until the doctors say the all clear is given to resume what you were doing before.
And we've evolved as athletes to the point to where everything seems to be specialized, and nothing wrong with it, because you've got access to tremendous equipment and trainers to help you get to the highest level that you possibly can. That's all great. A basketball hoop in the backyard, dribbling on grass, going out to a vacant lot with some friends and throwing a baseball around and setting up your own field. Who's to say that in a lot of cases we don't go back to some of that? But there's some tremendous athletes, not recently, but in the not too distant past, that they learned their craft. That's how they became well. And we always talk about, boy, when I was growing up in whenever 60s, the 50s, whatever, it was a simpler time. And maybe we need to go back to that to some degree.
Yeah, I look at the golf world, and thank you for posting the screen for those of you watching this via video.
I didn't post that. Actually, asking.
Yeah, right. If you are, then you're quarantined for the rest of your life, probably.
It's perfectly fine to be quarantined at the old course.
Yeah, it would be, except it's expensive. It would be a high bill to have to stay there for a month or two. I
thought you would enjoy the background. So
yes. Well, speaking of that, as we've talked about in other blogs before, Scotland's a place that I consider one of my favorite destinations in the world, and I'd planned to go there this summer. That trip has now been postponed indefinitely, and for lack of a better word, canceled, and then I'll just reschedule it at another time. And I was talking to some of the people that I had to make the phone call to or the email to and say, please cancel our reservations. And you talk about a town that is going to lose everything this year. If you've never been to St. Andrews, there are golf courses and there's a university, and everything else is catered to both. And the university's closed, and the golf courses are open to the general public. But that's a community that 99% of its dollars come from tourists. There are restaurants, there are pubs, there are bed and breakfasts, there are hotels that if you're not there to play golf, then there's no reason for you to really be there, or to go to school at the University of St. Andrews. There's really nothing else in St. Andrews, and there's a few golf courses in the vicinities. There's clubs and pubs and all kinds of hotels in other parts of Scotland that are similarly populated as is St. Andrews, and all of them are expecting a terrible economic summer.
Andy, and I had to cancel my trip to Pleasanton this summer, but I'm sorry when we go to Scotland, but and maybe the answer to this, because we're talking about golf right now. It's my understanding in San Antonio, where we live, that golf courses are still open. That,
yes, they have the option.
You're allowed to go and play golf. I'm assuming that's because it's considered a form of exercise. but I only say that if it's in the golf cart, because you're still allowed to go outside and exercise. So I'm assuming that's so. So are the golf courses at St. Andrews still open?
Well, we're still in March, and for the most part, and I don't know if the golf courses there are open or closed, but their season really doesn't begin until mid-April. It's just too cold to play. They're mainly November through March, except for a few days each week, maybe, where the temperature gets into the 50s and people will venture out. But yes, in San Antonio, and I believe that it's not necessarily this way nationwide, but the city golf courses are open. I believe the Quarry is still open. I think La Cantera closed for a indefinite period of time until this is over. And I think it's on a case-by-case basis. La Cantera caters to a lot of people who are staying in the hotel and in the travel industry. So there's a lot of people that could be coming in from other parts of the country to stay there. And I believe that's one of the reasons why they've chosen to close. But the city golf courses have remained open, and they say we're not going to put rakes in the bunkers. There's not going to be any water jugs on the golf course. Walk if you can, ride if you have to, and unless you really just can't handle it, leave the pin in when you putt. So there are some kind of restrictions back, but they are still open and they're still doing business, which I think for those of us that play golf, I've kind of gone back and forth on this as to how much I want to play, because I typically don't play well when my mind isn't focused on what I'm doing. And right now, and I can tell this from the 2 weeks that we've been through this social distancing and working remotely, that my mind has been all over the map. So I don't know if playing golf would be therapeutic or would just upset me more.
Like personally, I think any chance that we could have some sense of normalcy is beneficial. So maybe I don't know what the green fees are during this time, if they've lowered them or whatever, but it's always good to get out of the house. I mean, I try to get out a couple of times a day and at least walk around the block. So maybe do people a world of good to get out, and even if they didn't want to play 18 or play 9, play 3 or 4, just to get out, walk around, get some sun on you, and breathe some fresh air.
Absolutely. When you look at, you and I have talked about this before when in relation to sports and how this is what the end game of this is. My hope is that whether we have a restart of the NBA or NHL seasons, and I think with each day that goes by, that becomes less and less of a possibility. I heard Mark Cuban the other day say he would like to start in mid to late May. I've heard Rob Manfred say that they would like to restart baseball in late May or June. The NFL is looking at ways to do its draft differently because there will not be a party in Las Vegas. And we'll
have a little feedback there going.
Well, and we'll see how the other places operate and how other leagues operate. But I think one of the things that's changed in the last 20, 30 years in the sports world is that the NFL and college football are two most popular sports. As much as baseball is still considered America's pastime, football is certainly the barometer of how we gauge our sports activities. And I just don't see football working with no fans in the stadium. Yeah, you could play the games, but the NFL and especially college football is about tailgating, about socializing, and sitting in the seat that you've been sitting in your entire life at your favorite college team, and having those relationships that you've always had. And so I hope we get to a point well before June and July that we can get the football things kicked back up, because I can't imagine the psyche of the sports fan in this country without football.
Well, I think on certain levels, you're absolutely right. But Andy, there are a lot of football games that are played in front of almost nobody. There's a number of of teams that don't draw well. And if you're not one of the big guys, if you're not Michigan or Texas or Clemson or Alabama or something like that, because the trend has been over the last 10 years that the fan base has been eroding as far as attendance, except for some of the larger schools and some smaller schools in the communities. But overall, so playing in front of no one for a lot of teams, for many teams, wouldn't be different than the meager crowd of them we're getting now. I personally wouldn't, if that's the only way I get a chance, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you from a social aspect, the tailgating, the pageantry of the game, that takes a lot out of it. Takes a lot of steam out of it. But and one of the things that may come out of this, and this isn't a silver lining thing. It's just I'm thinking about this. I've always felt that in every sport, I'm going to pick one. If there are too many games, the NFL just added another one. And maybe through this, we come to the realization of we don't need this, because I know you lived this as well as I did, that when we were kids, there was football season, basketball season, a baseball season, a track and field season, and they really didn't overlap. And now they all run into each other. And it seems like for some of them, they're just year round.
Well, I think that as more and more kids specialize in hopes of becoming great at whatever they are going to be great at, that's why you see the seasons elongated. I think the reason that baseball is so long now is that owners have realized when they play double headers, they don't make as much money as when they play single games. Maybe we go back to that. I think baseball statistically is either based on 154 or 162, depending on what era you're from, in terms of numbers of games. The NFL, by going to 17 games, was able to reduce 1 or 2 preseason games, which I've always think is good. And I think the NBA could go back to an 82-game schedule and start their season later in November and finish in July. I think that there's really not a lot going on in June and July that interferes with the sports fans, ideas of what they like to do. And football season hasn't started yet, and as you've mentioned, the baseball fans have dwindled a little bit. But I don't know that we'll ever go back to playing fewer games. I just think there's too much money to be made by playing fewer games. But it'll be interesting to see just how sports in general changes as companies who have propped up these leagues with incredibly high sponsorships, if they're still able to do that, if their economic situation allows them to continue to do that in the future.
Well, it just in total, Andy, from an economic standpoint, you said, there's way too much money to cut back in games. Well, what if through this people don't have as much disposable income?
Exactly.
They're not going to be buying as many tickets. From a corporate sponsorship standpoint, how do you go to a corporate sponsor who got decimated during this, and and they say no, we can't do this? Kind of hard to argue with them. The smaller companies, the mom and pops that are a large part of their revenue that they place in some sort of a sponsorship or advertising buy with a sports team. Can they really afford that going forward? I think that remains to be seen. And then if the economics are such that forego buying tickets, then these contracts that players have, our team be able to sustain paying those if the revenues diminish. And I think that's something that is a long-term deal. I don't know what the effects of that's going to be, whether we see it immediately or it's something that we see over a long period of time and which way the trend goes.
Very well.
But if I'm a sports owner, I'm like any other business owner right now. I'm concerned.
Absolutely. I think a lot of owners are. I think a lot of athletic directors and presidents at universities are concerned. Just what the fallout's going to be when this is all over, hopefully sooner than later. So that'll do it for this edition of Sports Martinis. Jim, tell us where people can find us.
Yeah, well, we're all over social media with the exception of Facebook. I don't know what's happened to us on Facebook. But you can go to, obviously listen to this podcast at iheart.com, but you can go to Sports Martinis on Instagram, Twitter, and you can check out my blog at texassportsjournal.com.
All right, that'll do it for this edition. Hopefully the next one we do, we're back to reality. If not, we'll do another virtual one. We'll see how all this plays out in the weeks ahead. Be safe and be healthy, Jim, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, Andy. Take care.
All right.
How long did we go?
27 minutes.
Oh, good.